The FK8 generation Honda Civic Type R has recently undergone a series of revisions. Whilst these revisions do sharpen the overall Type R package, that doesn't mean that you should write off pre-facelift cars that will soon be flooding dealerships when people trade in their cars. The question is, should you buy a nearly new FK8 Type R? So you guys know the drill by now. 2-litre turbocharged VTEC engine producing a healthy 316 brake horsepower and 295 pounds-feet of torque. Although if you're in America, that's 306 brake horsepower just due to the calibration for quality of fuel. 0 to 62 miles per hour takes 5.7 seconds and it has an impressive top speed of 169 miles per hour. All Honda Civic Type Rs are front-wheel drive, fitted with a limited slip differential and intelligent dual-axis suspension to help fight off torque steer. Every car is also a manual, so this is definitely a car for the purists. Now they say that beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but even someone like me who's not overly offended by the Type R's looks will freely admit that it is not a beautiful car. In true hot hatch fashion, it's designed to provoke a response. When you think about it, the breed is all about rebellion. It's not just about having your cake and eat it, more scoffing it right in front of the sports cars you put to shame. And that's how this car defines itself. These boy racery looks were all inspired by the touring car. That huge splitter, ducts and channels that help relieve air pressure from under the wheel arches, sills to keep the airflow attached, vortex generators on the roof, and of course, who could forget that enormous rear wing, all culminate in a package that generates genuine downforce. In fact, something that proves this not to just be marketing BS is the fact that on the new car, they widened one of the intakes by about 10 mil. Aerodynamicists then had to work on the floor of the car to help regain any downforce lost. I think that just goes to show the extreme levels of detail that actually gone into this car. It's no oil painting, but I suppose from an aerodynamicist's point of view, it is a beautiful thing. Now here's where the Type R being based on the regular Honda Civic really is an asset, because the sturdy and durable design of the cabin has stood the test of time. Sure, you might find a few scuffs around the bottom of the door trims, which is only natural of a car of a few years old, but I think the design has aged pretty well in here. But more importantly, this cabin was originally designed to take the rigours of family life, which makes it pretty child-proof. Anyone knows that there's no more destructive force in nature than a young toddler. Something that hasn't stood the test of time is the infotainment system, and even in the latest incarnation of that, in the most up-to-date Type R, it is still not great. So that's something to keep in mind. Now later cars are actually compatible with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and that's my best advice to anybody, is plug your smartphone in straight away and use that interface, because frankly this one, even in its latest form, is just subpar. Now initially there were two variants of the Type R, the standard car and the GT. Now this is a GT and it comes with various extra equipment such as reversing cameras. And I'd say probably go for the GT cars, of which can be identified by their red trim running across the skirting. Something to remember with the Type R, that in the back there is seating for 2, not 3, like there is in a regular Civic. Although these two outermost posts are perfectly adequate for adults. And the boot is a class-leading 420 litres, making this a genuine day-to-day proposition. So basically, unless you've been living under a rock, you know all about the Honda Civic Type R's dynamic capabilities, both on track and on really challenging B roads, and everything you've read and heard is true. This platform, this chassis is so beautifully engineered. The balance, the way the weight transfers through the corners, how precise and plugged in the whole steering mechanism is to the experience of driving the car. This car in 2017 just started to overlap the Focus RS when that was on its way out, and I always used to put it this way, that the Focus RS was an amazingly capable car. It's still one of the all-time great hot hatchbacks, but this makes you work for the performance. Being front-wheel drive might be a disadvantage off the line, and it'll lose that game of top trumps in terms of 0 to 60, but driver involvement, the fact that this car actually demands that the driver has a good understanding of the limit of adhesion and how tyres behave when cornering really sharply, or you know, the fact that you can't just boot it, you have to manage the quite substantial levels of torque this engine has to offer. That's what makes this car, for me, one of the all-time greats. It doesn't just sit back and get on with it. You're not a passive part of this experience. You're very much needed behind the wheel to get the most out of this car. So yeah, as we said before, it's manual only, and it's got a really lovely mechanical shift. And if you want to look like a hero in front of your friends, it has an auto blip function. Though, for those who really do enjoy track days and mastering their machine, that function can be turned off. So if you like heel and toeing yourself, have at it. For everyone else, appear like the Stig to your best mate whilst in the passenger seat, probably scaring them whilst generating some quite substantial G-forces. Now, as standard, these cars run on Continental tyres, and it's quite a soft compound, which means they heat up quite quickly, and that's where a lot of this car's grip comes from. Even on greasy conditions like today, they actually hang on quite well. Our recommendation, actually, especially after driving a Type R with Cup 2 tyres from Michelin, is maybe to go for a set of those, because it unlocks an extra level of performance of this car, and that's exactly what you see on things like the new limited edition. Now, in the FK8 generation, a series of selectable drive modes were introduced. This little switch down here, you can flick it down and you go into comfort mode, which slackens off those adjustable dampers and just gives you a little bit more livability with the car day to day. That little bit of added comfort is more than enough for people who are obviously invested in a hot hatchback and the lifestyle that comes with it. It is obviously firmer than a regular Civic, but it's not back-breaking. When you start the car up, it actually lives in sport mode from the get-go, and that means you've got a more responsive throttle, the steering gains a nice bit of weight, and yeah, as an all-round day-to-day B-road setting, I'd say sport is probably where it belongs. It still retains a little bit of suppleness in the suspension to deal with broken tarmac and not to upset itself going into corners. But if you do venture onto the track, you can go up into Plus R, and this morphs the character of the car a little bit because it applies a totally different torque map to the engine. So the engine actually behaves in a different way through the rev range, and you can feel it immediately. If you're on about 25% throttle in sport mode and flick into Plus R, the car immediately picks up. It's got this immediate torquey response much earlier in the rev range. And yeah, this is where the car is tightened up. It's super precise, and round a racetrack, this thing really fancies its chances against some much bigger and badder machinery. Whilst I don't doubt the new and improved FK8 cars will lap a track a few tenths quicker than this car, I think in the real world, with average Joe sat behind the wheel, does that really matter? But something that does matter is thoroughly checking any used Type R for signs of wear and tear. Obviously, the nature of this car invites people to drive it quickly, and yes, sometimes people do run out of talent long before the car does. So you want to be checking for shut lines, to check for replacement parts, colour matching on any replacement bumpers, and any sort of creases or folds in places where they're really not meant to be. I know basic stuff, you'd probably look at this for any car, but even more so on a hot hatchback where, you know, potentially someone could have had a bit of an off in one. The good news is that mechanically speaking, this car is typical Honda in that it's proven very reliable over the past few years. There's short of an airbag recall, there's really not a lot wrong with this car. Some owners do report a bit of a crunch from first to second gear. Honda don't really reckon there's a problem, and in my personal opinion, I think that's probably a little bit due to misuse of the car. But, you know, obviously make sure the gearbox has got a nice slick motion, because it's actually one of the most joyous elements of the whole driving package, this manual. Really short, close gearbox, but also something that's quite easy to put into the wrong gear, I guess, if you're driving in anger. So check the gearbox. Tyres, like I say, if you can find one with a set of Michelin Cup 2s on, that's absolute winner, because a full set is going to cost you about £400. Like I say, the Continentals are very good, and I think if you're not going to take the car on track, the Continentals are fine. But if you are spending a lot of time at racetracks like Castle Combe or doing track days at Snetterton or anything like that, the Michelins probably are a worthwhile investment. And then of course, living with this car every day, there's very little in terms of compromise over a regular hatchback. It still has a big boot, as we've said, it still carries 4 people, and if you're on your best behaviour, I've seen about 35 mpg out of one of these cars before as well. But if you want some real world proof of the durability of the FK8, take this car as your prime example, because last week it spent 5 full days from 9 AM to 5 PM being hammered around a tight and technical test track by motoring journalists and professional racing drivers. 5 solid days of that. Then it spent the past 2 days with us at our test track, on this long runway doing in excess of 140 miles per hour more times than I care to tell you. And tonight, I'm going to drive it home. I'm going to drive it for the rest of the week, and there will be no squeaks, no rattles, no warning lights. You can buy this and be supremely confident in the engineering that's gone in to make this a hardy machine that can really take some punishment. And I think, considering that a lot of hot hatchbacks, engineers really know that most people will just use them primarily for road use, there are very few that I can think of that would take this level of punishment and not require a little bit of mechanical attention after. Now, when it comes to pricing on the FK8 Type R, there's good and bad news. The good news for existing owners is that your car has held its value pretty well. The bad news for people buying into the car is that they're maybe not quite as cheap as what we want. But as mileages increase and the years go by, inevitably, just like every other car, these things may become a bit of a steal. Typically at the moment, a 2017 car with less than 10,000 miles can be had for around about £25,000, which is pretty good considering it also comes with a dealer warranty. For more on the Honda Civic Type R and the all-new family of Civic Type Rs, make sure you head to YesAuto.com. Head to YesAuto.com for the latest car news and reviews, and don't forget to check us out on social media. We're in all the usual places such as Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Simply search for YesAuto.